Good afternoon. Today's lecture is on temple architecture part 2. We would be discussing the various forms of the temples and how the temple tradition has been carried out in India to arrive at the form, the typology and the structure of the Indian temple. What is a temple? A temple is a place of prayer where man and God are in unison, humility rules and there is no fear. A temple can be a mosque, it can be a church, it can be a synagogue, it could be a gurdwara, it could even be a small little temple, a mandir in a house, in a kitchen, or it could be a large Shinto shrine or even a Chinese pagoda. All these are forms of the temple. A temple is also derived from the Latin word called templum. What is a templum? It is a structure reserved for religious or spiritual activities such as prayer or sacrifice. Okay? A temple can also mean the word template, which is basically a plan in preparation of the building that was marked out on the ground by the augur or the priest. Templa also became associated with the dwelling place of a god. So, the temple is basically a sacred place. It is a place where the gods reside. In India, the hills are considered very sacred. Why? Because we say that the gods, it is the abode of gods. The hill is supposed to be the abode of the Devi, of the god, of the Devta and so on and so forth. What is really Hindu temple architecture? It has evolved from a distinct regional pattern based on cultural practices, based on lifestyle, based on myths, beliefs. And sometimes we classify temples for ease on two parts, the North Indian temple style called the Nagara and Dravida, the South Indian style. And obviously the word Dravida comes from Dravidian, which is the inhabitant. You know, we had the Aryans and we had the Dravidians. The Dravidians were the original race of Indians who were moved and pushed to the south by the Aryans upon their invasions. Temple building in India has given expression to the idea of the temple as a seat of God, the Devasthan, where the divinity takes the form imagined by worshippers. Actually, God doesn't exist, but just because worshippers need a place, so we say the linga or the deity or the statue of the god is really an incarnation. It's like a human figure which is there because worshippers need to have a contact between the world of humans and that of the unnatural or the unseen, which is the deity. So, as you see the picture on the left, there is a simplified components of the Hindu temple. To begin with, you have the gopurams, which are the tall gateways on all the four sides of the temple wall. There is a girdle temple wall. Sometimes there could be 2 gopurams, there could be 4 gopurams, followed by the Natmandir and the Bhogmandir, which are basically halls of offering, halls of prayer, halls of meeting. Then you have the Jagmohan or the Mandapa, and lastly you have the Garbhagriha, into which is installed the emblem of the deity, and this is topped or capped by the Vimana or the Shikhara. It is called the Shikhara in North India and the Vimana in South India. Indian temples in general are also based on 3 categories which are based on their geographical locations and peculiar features. The North Indian temples are branded as the Nagara style. The South Indian temples of the Deccan belong to the Vesara style. The third category is called the Dravidian style, again found in South India. So, here we have based on their Vimanas, basically on how the top, the cupola part is resting is the, so this is the North Indian or the Nagar style of architecture, the South Indian or the Dravidian style, and here you have the combined or the Vesara style. Okay. This is largely the way the temples could also be styled based on the Shikhar or the Vimana aspect. The first temple that we are going to discuss today in the Nagar temples is the Khajuraho, wonderful glory of the Khajuraho temple. Here what do we find? Distinctively the architecture of the Khajuraho temple, and what do we have as an example is the Kandariya Mahadev. In plan the temple is a square with a number of graduated projections in the middle of each side, giving a cruciform shape to a number of re-entrant angles on each side. What does it mean? It means that there is a lot of surface which is being given for decoration or embellishment all along the temple front, even though it is a bare square in plan. In elevation, again these crenellations or even these cuts in the square plan are formed by these shikharas or these mini shikharas as you see them. And finally, there is a kalasha on the main temple, and there is an amalaka, and finally there is a finial on top. So, the shikhara is what dominates the entire temple. It moves as a convex shape here. The Garbhagriha, which is its hiding inside itself, there is a circumambulation path or what you call the parikrama of the temple, and finally you have all this Bhogmandir, Natmandir, the mandapa, the hall, the dancing hall where the women, the beautiful women used to dance and offer as prayer to the priest and then to the god. These are all components of this, and these divisions were called the transepts, which were actually flanking out of the square plan, and the temple was oriented east-west, and all the temples were housed or placed upon a podium. So, what was it? It was basically space being appropriated to give a lot of decorative surfaces to be part of the temple. As I told you, the North Indian temple, the most famous example, we saw a picture there, it was the Kandariya Mahadev. This is the plan, the square, two square plan of the Kandariya Mahadev, the east-west orientation as we read. So, beginning from this side, okay, this is the wall of the temple, what you see here. These are mini subsidiary shrines in the four sides, the cardinal direction east-west, and here you have north-south. So, beginning with number 1, you have the Ardha Mandapa, followed by the Mandapa, the Maha Mandapa or the Grand Hall. What is number 7? Are the transepts that we saw in the previous slide. And finally, you have number 4 as the Antralya, which is really between the Maha Mandapa and number 5, the Garbhagriha. So, the Garbhagriha is what? It is the sanctum sanctorum, and around this you have the parikrama, okay, and the jagati is the podium on which this temple is standing, and number 9 which you see are, as I have already told you, these are the subsidiary shrines. So, why have we chosen the example of the Kandariya Mahadev temple today? Erected towards the middle of the 11th century by the Chandela Dynasty, this great Shiva temple represents the climax of the Nagara style. That is why I have brought it to class today. It represents the climax of the Nagara style of architecture, culminating in a long series of experiments which were done by architects, done by priests, done by the master builders, and the circumstances of place, time, age, height of mastery of architecture and sculpture confirm that this is one of the unsurpassed achievements of Hindu art and architecture. Taking its name from the word Kandara or cave, the Kandariya Mahadev temple is the tallest monument at Khajuraho, its spire rising more than 30.5 meters above the lofty plinth on which the temple is elevated, which really means beyond the jagati, beyond number 8, this podium that you see, the rectangle, it rises to 30.5 meters. The temple faces east and extends some 30.5 meters in length and 20 meters in width. So, it is based on 2 squares whose corners are cut off by diagonal flights of 4 deeply stepped in recessions, and thus offering on the exterior several series of receding profiles. This is the glory of the Kandariya Mahadev temple that I was telling you, these transepts are basically, they are the ones on which it is possible to create these smaller subsidiary shikharas. So, it is actually a sculpture in the form of a temple. Okay. The projects in the plan are also carried upwards to the top of the shikhara, and thus there is strong emphasis on the vertical lines. This is what is very important. Those crenellations that we saw on plan are actually also being carried out in the vertical. An example of this architecture, the most famous one of this kind of elaboration is there. There are many Khajurahos all over the countryside, but this is the one that stands out completely in terms of its successful architecture. Another view of the same temple that we just saw, the Kandariya Mahadev. This is one of the subsidiary shrines that you can see, which are four, on all four sides of this. The long main portico, this is the east-west portico, beginning with the mandapa, the Ardha Mandapa, and so on and so forth. And finally, you have these buttress spires and ultimately ending on to the Vimana, which is the topmost part. Hiding underneath it is the Garbhagriha. The cella containing a phallus or the image and its porch together with an assembly hall aligned to with the cella door are enclosed in a broad pillared veranda like ambulatory. So, this is the ambulatory that you see. This is the ambulatory. What is an ambulatory? It is basically a pillared hall around which you can move. So, as a pradakshina around the temple. The whole area comes under the shelter of a vast many-tiered roof which usually preserves the basic form with a portico. The cella with its ambulatory is surmounted by a massive buttress spire. This is the one that we are talking about. Why is it buttressed? Because there are smaller spires all around it, okay, with elaborately carved rhythmic devices crowned with deeply guard-runed flat circular fashion known as the amalaka, which is the top here. This is the rounded one, which is the amalaka, and the kalash or the inverted pot on top, and finally the finial. So, this is very typical of the Khajuraho temples, the amalaka and the kalash. The effect of height of a temple till now was mitigated and compromised by the horizontal courses of stone used for construction. But with the shikharas at Khajuraho, this was also achieved, and the flattened temple actually got a great height because it was like a chain of mountains. As I said earlier, the abode of the gods are the hills or the mountains. So, this was like a replica of the mountain gods, being actually made. These were the subsidiary hills and finally the topmost hill. The exterior was of prime concern to the architect, and as we say, it included as many horizontal moldings which contained statues of erotic sculptures, and this one in detail here, and largely these figures framed within molded pilasters. What are pilasters? Pilasters are dumb or they are false pillars. They are within the walls. It gives you the feeling of columns, but actually there are no pillars there. They are called pilasters. The grand scale of the Kandariya Mahadev temple is the one which actually dominates the countryside, and there is an indented plan as we saw. So, the indentions are there used for all these relief sculptures, and the effect of sun and shadow can be clearly seen in this, and it has got a mountain like profile, and it is unsurpassed for its architecture and glory and art and sculpture in North Indian architecture. Ornamentation, as we saw, both sculpture in the round, which is freestanding sculpture, and sculpture in relief, which is there all along the crenellated walls of the temple. So, all along the mandapa, the junction of the walls of the mandapa, the passageways surrounding the sanctuary, these mark one of the most ritually vulnerable parts of the monument. That brings us now to Dravidian architecture. What was the Dravidian style of architecture? It was one that emerged thousands of years ago in the southern part of the Indian subcontinent, because we knew from history that the Dravidian people were the original inhabitants of the Indo-Gangetic plain who were gradually pushed by the Aryans who came in from North India. And they moved and they created these pyramidal shaped temples called kovils in Tamil, which are dependent on intricate carved stone in order to create a steep design consisting of many statues of kings, warriors, dancers. So, this really is a picture of one of the temple towns, and these were highlighted by what are known as the gateways or the gopurams, all embellished like offerings to the gods. Mentioned as one of the three styles of temple building in ancient book Vastu Shastra, it originated mainly in the region of Tamil Nadu. So, the cities of the Meenakshi temple, Madurai, the Sun temple there, and so on and so forth are examples of Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Kerala, Andhra Pradesh, where one finds that the Dravidian style of architecture is there. Various kingdoms and empires such as the Cholas, the Cheras, the Pandyas, Pallavas, Rashtrakutas, Chalukyas, Hoysalas and the Vijayanagar Empire were largely the ones who made a substantial contribution in the evolution of Dravidian architecture through the ages. It even spread to northeastern and central Sri Lanka, Maldives and various parts of Southeast Asia. Angkor Wat and Padmanabhan in Indonesia were earlier based on early Dravidian architecture. So, the architecture of Indonesia and the famous World Heritage Site of Angkor Wat in Cambodia is also influenced by nothing else but the Dravidian architecture. So, the South Indian temple architecture largely comprises of, any South Indian temple comprises of three parts: the base, which is still here, followed by the wall, they call it the wall here, and finally the superstructure. The superstructure really contains the shikhara, the freestanding sculptures, the deity which is being honored and preserved, and a series of these which are really animal figures. They could be the bull, they could be whatever they considered sacred, the cow, and so on and so forth. Okay. So, the Dravida style of architecture is invariably employed for Hindu temples in modern Tamil Nadu from the 7th to the 18th century, characterized by its pyramidical or kutina type tower. Pyramidical tower, of course, but this is also the inverted pot. Okay. They are formerly in Mysore and Andhra Pradesh. The South Indian temple consists essentially of a square chambered sanctuary topped by a superstructure, tower or spire, and an attached pillared porch or hall called the mandapa, enclosed by a peristyle of cells within a rectangular court. And this really is actually a breakdown of this. We talked about the cupola, the pyramidical roof, the lower thing, and finally an ambulatory or a pathway around the main cella. The external walls of the temple are segmented by pilasters. Again, pilasters are false pillars. They carry niches for housing sculpture. Remember that always the temple architecture was meant to glorify the god. And how can you glorify the god? By adding embellishment, by sculpture, by day-to-day life, by erotic figures, and basically a display of art and architecture of the time. Each story in the temple is delineated by a parapet of miniature shrines, square at the corners, rectangular, with barrel vaulted roofs, as you can see here. There are barrel vaulted roofs at the edges. This is not very clear, but largely आपको यहाँ पर इस here you can figure out. The tower is topped by a dome shaped cupola, that's the dome shaped cupola, that one here, and a crowning pot or a finial. The most famous example is the Brihadeeswarar Temple at Tanjore. It was completed only a few years earlier than the Khajuraho Temple in about 10,010 AD. It's equally imposing Hindu monument. It's considered to be the climax of building tradition. Its patron was Raja Raja, the sculpture of whose is also installed in this temple. And the gift of Raja Raja was a golden pot finial. The final top that you see is actually in gold, and there were dwellings within the temple for all grades of priesthood who were attached and other buildings of state. This is the entrance to this temple that you see. The entrance gate is also full of this, and this is that barrel vault dome shaped roof that I was mentioning in the previous slide. The ruler's particular involvement and supervision in the construction of the temple is recorded right in the inscriptions that cover the granite basement. So, it is a temple which also has a basement. This is the plan of the temple, and as you see, it is a rectangular plan again, Brihadeeswarar temple. The number 1 is your Garbhagriha, which is here. Number 2 is the pradakshina or the circumambulation. Then you have the Mahamandapas, and there is a Nandi shrine which is dedicated. So, as I said, the sacred animals were worshipped in the Tamil or the Dravidian style temple. The principal part of the temple itself is called the Vimana. It is always square in plan. The porches or the mandapas are there. You have gopurams which are very important, and one very significant thing is the temple tank. So, this is the water canal that runs along. This is the temple complex. It is a blow up of this image that you see here. Okay. And close to it is always a temple tank, which was a well for water, and as we said, priests also would stay along the temple. So, convenience of priests was there, and it was also used for sacred purposes. And it also kept the water pure and clean for the entire residents of the community who were around it. Okay. Originally, the temple was dedicated to Shiva, and the golden pot finial that we are talking about, given by Raja Raja, is here. The Thanjavur temple, it is also called the Thanjavur temple. It stands on a vast rectangular compound entered from the east. Always remember that the eastern end will always be marking the entry to the temple, because the first rays of the sun, when the sun begins to rise in the east, must fall on the deity. And extreme end pe here you will always have the deity or the Shivlingam or something like that. The entrance structure is aligned to the temple itself, the core of which consists of a square linga sanctuary surrounded by a passageway at 2 levels, while at the same time giving expression to the luminous energy of the linga radiating outward. Subsidiary shrines from other divinities such as sons of Shiva and Nataraja, the dance form of Shiva, stand freely within the compound. So, today the Brihadeeswarar temple and along the temple many other associated structures have been considered a World Heritage Site, and there is a core zone to it, and there is also a buffer zone. So, what you see as dark grey is a core zone where no development or no change is allowed, and the light grey is what you see as the buffer zone where limited things could happen. The most impressive aspect of the temple is a square tower that rises some 66 meters above the ground, directly above the sanctuary. It is built of granite blocks without mortar. That is the most important thing. They cantilever inside and they are hollow on the inside. The tower is carried on walls divided in 2 stories, each marked by a basement molding with animal friezes. So, basically there is a lot of sculpture happening on the exterior. The walls are rhythmically divided into alternating recesses and projections, the latter punctuated by niches to house carved images of Shiva in different aspects, including Nataraj. What is Nataraj? The dancing Shiva. So, as we said, there are receding stories here, and each of these is carrying images of the Shiva in various postures. The tower above is a steeply pyramidical composition of 13 stories. Now, again these are granite blocks laid without mortar, remember that. The notion of a multi-storied pyramidical tower is an essential feature of the Dravida temple, dating back to the earliest South Indian temples of the 7th and the 8th century. Here the storied tower is extended to create a monumental superstructure of unprecedented height and glamour. At the top of the massive octagonal to dome roof, once thought to consist of a single piece of stone, but actually fashioned out of several tightly fitted sections. Much speculation has taken about how these stones might have been lifted to such a great height, probably by ropes, or as your imagination as students can, scaffolding, sheer manpower, as well as the act of will, because building the temple was actually paying homage to God. And this practice can even be seen today when you go to the temples of Mahabalipuram, or you see the rathas, or you see the freestanding carvings at Konark and so on and so forth, where you find artisans actually still doing this kind of work even today in India. So, these are more examples of the Brihadeeswarar temple, the temple or the Vimana that rises to a height of 60.9 meters, bulbous monolith, okay, and you can see the Shiva in various poses all along. These are pilasters, and these are the recessed niches in which the sculptures or the moldings are housed, and these are the freestand carved ones in stone. So, now let us move on from the Dravidian to the next style, a little bit more about the Dravidian. Okay, let us talk about the gopuram. The gopuram is actually nothing but a barrel vaulted top with an inclined base forming the stories like the Brihadeeswara, as you can see in the picture on top, and this little entrance, this shaft of space that allows you to puncture inside. So, the porches or mandaps, which always cover and precede the door leading to the cell, the gate pyramids. The pyramids are also called the gate pyramids. So, you have one enclosure and one enclosure through which you move, and there is a shaft of space, and finally they would have an axis which would lead to the entrance to the temple. The pillared halls or the chaultries are used for many purposes and are the invariable accompaniments of these temples. These temples always contain tanks or wells for water, as we have already seen, and each temple has these three parts: the mandaps, the gopurams and the shaltris. Okay. Next we come to the great Lingaraja temple at Bhubaneswar. Bhubaneswar consists of the golden triangle, where you have the Lingaraja, then you have the sun temple at Konark, which is the black pagoda, and you also have the Jagannath temple, where you always have the Jagannath temple yatra, which is also called the Rath Yatra, and these three together form the series of temples at the golden triangle, of which today we will discuss the Lingaraja temple. It was built by the ruler Yashovati Kesari in the 7th century, who shifted his capital from Jaipur to Bhubaneswar. It is also a temple assigned to the 10th century. The Natmandir and the Bhogmandir of the Lingaraj temple are of later origin. What is the temple? The temple, the vast Bindu Sagar lake in the center, around which are located the multitude of temples of Bhubaneswar. The Lingaraja temple is located in a spacious courtyard covering 250,000 square feet, bound by fortified walls, its tower rising to 180 feet, which is elaborately carved. This is what you see is the tower. This is elaborately carved. And as you can see, compared to the Brihadeeswarar temple at Thanjavur, where you could identify the stories, this is having limitless stories. The Shiva Lingam is the sanctum of the Lingaraj, rises to a height of 8 inches above the floor level, 8 feet in diameter. Other temples are there, the Bhagavati temple and so on and so forth, and a total worship of 24 services is offered each day. Once a year, an image of Lingaraj is taken to the Jal Mandir in the center of the Bindu Sagar lake, which we call the Visarjan. Other temples in Bhubaneswar are the Anant Vasudev, the Raja Rani, Mukteshwara, Kedarshara, Siddheshwara, Parasmeshwara. Okay. But what is important for us today is that what is the legend behind the temple? The legend has it that Shiva revealed to Parvati that Bhubaneswar or Ekamratith was a resort favored by him over Benares. Parvati, in the guise of a cowherd woman, decided to look at the city herself. Two demons, who were called Kriti and Vasa, desired to marry her on the way. She requested them to carry her upon their shoulders and finally crushed them under her own weight. Shiva then created the Bindu Sagar lake to quench her thirst, because she had tasted blood, and she was very upset, and then took abode here as Kriti Vasa or Lingaraj. That is the story or the legend behind the temple. The temple consists of 4 parts. The first one, the temple plan, as you see on the left, from the top you have the Vimana, which is actually here. Then you have the Jagmohan, which is this one. Then you have the Natmandir, so on and so forth. And then you have the Bhogmandir, it's somewhere there. Okay. So these are the 4 parts of any temple of the Bhubaneswar style: the Bhogmandir, the Natmandir, the Jagmohan and the Vimana. As is evident from the great Lingaraja at Bhubaneswar, the temple was dedicated to Shiva. The Lingaraja, to accommodate the increasing number of pilgrims, a number of additions were made to the Lingaraja in subsequent years. The Natmandir or the hall of dance, the Bhogmandir or the hall of offering were the 4 major ones. So here you have the Natmandir, here you have the Bhogmandir, then you have the Jagmohan, and finally you have the Vimana. So they are all rising in height like this, as you see. So here Vimana, then you have the Jagmohan, then you have the Bhogmandir, and finally you have the Natmandir. Okay. So these are the principal parts of any kind of Odissan temple, as they call them. The great Lingaraja at Bhubaneswar, again this is the compound, okay, in front of it, and you have the temple, the Vimana dominating the entire scene, and the height of which is 180 feet. It is centered around a pyramidal Jagmohan. The Vimana is squarish in plan. It is wrapped by clustered bands vertically bent inward to an overall tapered profile. Okay. Now, Note that the prominent undercutting of layers throughout create shadow lines and also keep the monsoon rains off, because Bhubaneswar is right next to your waterfront and also it gets a lot of monsoon that comes in the way. Secondly, it is near the sea, so Odisha, so it is all along this. But what you see in the picture is also these flying sculptures, which are very important, and they are boldly outlined against the sky, and heraldic medallions elevate both buildings and punctuate the interaction of vertical and horizontal. So, it is important to understand these flying sculptures, which are there as the stories in between these recesses. A better picture of the same, and you can also